So thank you for joining us today. We're going to be doing sort of user services and user training today within iLab. iLab is software built for assisting cores in the processing of their requests, managing the workflow of those requests, and then billing for those rendered services. I'm going to start today at the registration point. So if everybody could go to this URL, we're going to actually have you guys register for an account in iLab. So the URL...
You can minimize that screen report. The middle button on the bar. The top.
Middle? Oh, this
of
is
this
Mac.
black thing.
This one?
Yeah, yellow button. Thank you.
Oh, I'm not a Mac person. Okay. Okay. So we're going to go to umich.corefacilities.org. This is the landing page for logging into iLab. Is it connected? There we go.
We are connected to the network. Wi-Fi can be a little finicky sometimes.
Okay. Great. Okay, so if everybody could go ahead and go to this landing page, this is where you will log into iLab. You'll notice there are two different options here. The UMich user option is for internal users. So if you will all click there, this will take you to your authentication page, and you can log in using your University of Michigan credentials. Go ahead and take a moment to do that. Once you do that, you should land back on an iLab registration page. So if you could just raise your hand once you hit the iLab registration page, I'll let you know where we're going to have you register. Anybody need help getting to that registration page? Okay, great. So you should see it will auto-import several of the attributes with your account, and then it should ask you for a PI. You're going to go ahead and select iLab Test for that drop-down menu. Is everybody on the same page? The little registration page?
Mine says digital ID card.
There we go. Yeah, I got digital ID.
Okay, you're going to want to hit confirm. If you get to the digital, excuse me, sorry. If you get to the digital ID card, go ahead and hit confirm, and that should, now you're at the iLab account registration. So in the PI, and you can start typing iLab. It will take you to the correct point in the drop-down menu, and you want to select iLab Test. Yep. Okay. Okay, so once you get to that iLab registration page, it should auto-import several attributes from your account using the authentication. You'll need to indicate the PI. For all of the help desk folks, that's going to be the iLab Test Lab. If you want to go ahead and go to this URL here, then you can register for the first time.
I can already register.
Oh, great. Then you can just go ahead and log in, and we'll land you on the same page. So once you've processed that, you'll want to also indicate a phone number for both yourself and your PI. For you guys, that's just sort of the help desk, so you can put just the office number or something like that. And then go ahead and submit the registration form. And just quick show of hand when you're done with that part, so I know it's okay to move on. I am not a University of Michigan user, so I'm going to log in using my external credentials. Everybody all caught up? So once you process that, that registration page, you should see a screen that basically says, thank you, your lab access request is pending. Your lab manager will be notified of the request. And until your request is processed, so until those users have been accepted into the lab, their lab manager or PI will receive a notification in the system that says their lab access request is pending. And they need to then log into iLab and accept them into the lab. So I'm going to act as your lab manager now, and we're going to go see where all of those access requests just went into the system. Okay. So I'm going to switch to give you a view of a PI. So if you are a user and you are not a PI or lab manager, this part won't apply to you, but this is stuff that needs to happen in the background for you to be able to place requests in the system. So don't worry if you're not able to access what is displaying on the screen. That's a PI and lab manager role only. So as a PI or lab manager, when I receive that notification, I can come into my lab and see any pending lab access requests. So as a user, if you've already registered for the first time and you log in and you land on this home page, you've already been accepted into a lab and you're set. If you log in and you don't land on this home page, just updated, but if you don't land on that home page, are you getting to that home page okay?
I'm at.
Does it say you're pending?
Pretty good. I don't really.
Yeah, that's the home page.
Okay.
So that means
Okay.
you have been accepted into a lab.
Okay.
So you're set to go. So you can see that everybody should be here. Is anybody who just registered for the first time not displayed on the screen here under the iLab test lab? Great. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and accept you all into the lab. As I'm doing this, you'll notice that your names are going to populate in the members list below. This is where shortcodes are assigned to a user. So once we accept them into the lab, they'll populate in the members list, and then we can checkbox fund assignments for the lab. I mentioned there was a financial integration with the University of Michigan that imports on a nightly basis the active shortcodes per PI. This is where those will populate. So we can assign the funds that are assigned to this particular PI, and the members who register against that lab can then be assigned for using those within the system. So I'm going to go ahead and accept folks into the lab, and then we're going to go through and assign the funds. Okay, let me give it a second to catch up there. Okay, and then I'm going to assign folks, let's see, who doesn't have one? And I'm going to click Save. Now I have updated my permissions, so all of those users have been accepted into a lab and they now have funds. Now they have a way to request items in the system. If I accept someone into the lab and they don't get funds assigned, when they go to try and place a request in the system, it's not going to allow them to do so because they won't have any funds to indicate as payment information, and it will kind of roadblock them at that point. So now we're going to be a customer in the system, and let's see. If I click on the List All Cores link in my left menu, I can see a list of all of the existing cores in the system. So these are the cores that are now live and ready to receive user requests. I'm going to go to a core that's not live in the system yet for demonstration purposes, so we're not submitting live requests to a live or test requests to a live core. But you would click on the name of one of these cores and that would take you to the core page. So I'm going to do the same thing, but we're going to go to one that's not live. So feel free to click on, if you are a user, feel free to click on one that is live if you are making a legitimate request.
So
Yeah.
Could you move the browser a little bit to the center of the screen?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're going to use our biosafety containment core for testing purposes today. And the specifics around what you see displayed for each core will be different depending on what the core offers. But this one is a nice simple look at the system. Sorry, it's a little slow. There we go. So each core will have several different tabs that are consistent across the cores. The About Our Core tab gives a basic overview of services, some contact information around the core. The Schedule Equipment tab is going to exist on any core that does scheduling. So if they have scheduled services or equipment like a microscope that you might want to reserve, you will see a Schedule Equipment tab. Not all cores will have a Schedule Equipment tab if they don't do some kind of scheduled service. On the Schedule Equipment tab, you will see a list of the variety of different kind of calendars that are available for scheduling on. This particular core has just one. Some cores may have several. If they have a lot of different schedules, they may elect to categorize them, in which case you would see the category names first, and you would need to click on a category to see the sublist of calendars within that category. To access a calendar, I simply click on the calendar name, or I can click on the View Schedule link on the right. So we can go ahead and do that. Oh, I'm Nicole. Hang on, I need to be Tony. Let's see. Bear with me one moment, and I need to give cores can determine whether they would like only trained users to access their calendars if they like. This particular core does have that set up. So I'm going to quickly go in and make Nicole, the user we are, a member. A member here. Sorry, bear with me one moment here. Okay. So I added the user we're logged in as, Nicole, is now a trained user on this calendar, so she can actually get in and schedule. So I'm going to just refresh the page here. And now I can actually access the calendar because my permissions have been added. A lot of cores don't have that trained user requirement. Some cores do. So if you ever land on a calendar and you can't see it, it's because they may have training access requirements there. So when I land on the calendar, I can see where there are reservations already made. And if I want to make a reservation for myself, I simply click and drag on the calendar for the time that I would like. When I do that, if I am part of more than one lab, this screen will come up. This is asking me to indicate which lab I'm making this request on behalf of. The reason this is important is because of what we just saw around the shortcode assignments. I may have different shortcodes based on the lab that I'm associated with. So lab A may have 5 or 7 different shortcodes, and I may be assigned to 2 of those. Lab B may have 5 or 7 of their own shortcodes, and I may be assigned to 2 or 6 of those. So what I'm selecting here is going to control what is displayed on the following page for my options in selecting that payment information. I'm going to go ahead and select the test lab. That's the one we were all just in, and click Next. This is going to pull up the reservation details. This page pretty much auto-populates and there's not much else I need to do here. It's going to automatically pull the click and drag time that I selected on the previous page. If I didn't get it just right, I can come in here and auto-adjust that if necessary. And then I can select the shortcode. So here are the fund assignments that Nicole has. She has 3 different shortcodes for this lab, and I can select one of those. And then I simply need to click Save My Reservation. When I do that, you can see it was added to the calendar here, and it is orange. This one is indicating that it is pending approval by the core. So the core has now received a notification that lets them know, hey, someone made a reservation and you need to go in and approve that. Oftentimes, if you're making a reservation for something that might be staff assisted or some kind of training, or maybe it's some consulting calendar, and the consultant needs to double check their calendar and make sure that works for them, core may put a setting on that requires approval. If you are at a core that does not require approval, once you make your reservation, it will look more like this one, where it just automatically turns gray and it does not turn orange, indicating that it does not require approval. Any questions on how to make a reservation? Again, we're simply going to the Scheduling tab, clicking on the calendar name we'd like, and then clicking and dragging to make our reservation. If we are part of multiple labs, we will indicate the lab, select our shortcode, and then simply click Save Reservation. Any questions around that process? Okay, great. I'm going to click back to return to schedules. This will take me back to the scheduling page. If I had other reservations to make on other calendars, I could do so here. This particular core has only one calendar, so we'll go ahead and move over to the tab to the right, which is called the Request Services tab. There's 2 main sections in this tab. The top section is the Project Requests section. This section allows for bundled services. The bottom section is the service list and pricing. You want to think about this section like a menu of all of the core's available services. So anything that the core offers that they want to be able to offer to customers, they will list here. You can click on the category name to open the category, or you may also simply click alphabetically if you want to see an alphabetical list of everything across all the categories. Again, this is a simple core with a single service and a single project, but many cores that you'll visit will have, a dozen different services that are listed there. You'll notice that the price is displayed here. Again, this is a core by core setting. Some cores may decide not to list their prices on this page. Most of them will. And you will be able to actually see the price. And you're also going to see in parentheses the price type you have been assigned to. So for all University of Michigan folks, that will be the internal price. If I were an external customer, I would be seeing an external price listed there. So to initiate a request with this core, I'm going to go back up to this project request section. You can see there's no buttons down here to actually request this item just by itself. So the core wants me to initiate a project request. So I'm going to click on request service. Again, it's asking me which lab I'm making this request on behalf of because I happen to be part of multiple labs. If you are only part of one lab as a user, you won't have to do this step. It will automatically know which lab you're talking about. When I do that, then any necessary forms that the core requires with my submission will populate. These forms are entirely customizable core by core. So what you experience on one core when you submit a request is not going to be the same as what you experience on another core when you submit a request. These details are all very specific to that particular type of project request. Now, for training purposes, I'm simply going to populate some responses in these fields, but if you were submitting a formal request, you would obviously want to make sure you were responding. The responses that you submit in these in this form is going to help the core build their quote and understand what types of services are you needing for your request. Okay, so we're just going to quickly go through the form here. A lot of cores don't have forms quite this elaborate. Okay, I'm going to, once I've completed my form, I'm going to click this button, Save Completed Form. This will be the same across cores, regardless of the contents of the form. The core is determining what elements they need in that form in order to process your request. But this Save Completed Form button will be the same across all cores. So you want to go ahead and click that once you've completed your form. Sorry, I clicked the wrong back button there. So once you've completed your form, it will automatically close shut for you and collapse. If you want to review what you added again, you can simply click on the View Form, and you can get those responses back here. You can see everything that we just entered because I saved the form. I can collapse that again to just get it out of the way. Once you've completed your form and you've saved your form, here's that shortcode selection again. So I'm going to indicate which shortcode I'm going to be using. Again, the only things that are going to show up in my drop-down menu are items that have been assigned to me by the lab on which I've made my request. Once I've completed adding the shortcode, I simply submit request to the core. Once I've done that, I'm going to land on this View My Requests tab. This View My Requests tab is sort of a bird's eye view of all of my requests in the system for the core. This particular researcher simply has one, but as time goes on, maybe you submit one request a month or one request a week. You will have one row for each one of the requests in the system. To give you sort of a quick review of what this page contains, we have the date the request was made. In the For column, we have our researcher name at the top here, so Nicole, and then you'll find the PI's name underneath that. This is going to be the lab name. So this one particular one is called iLab Test, but the standard naming convention for all of our University of Michigan labs is PI last name, comma, first name, and then UMich lab. The service ID is basically like a unique identifier within our system. The standard naming convention for this is the initials of the core, so you can see that's taken from here. And then a hyphen, the initials of the user, so Nicole, and then an auto-incrementing number here. The service ID is somewhat customizable by the core. You may run into slightly different naming conventions for each core, but each core will have a consistent naming convention that they're utilizing. The next column is the status column. This is going to help you see where your request stands in the workflow. So we initiated the request as the customer, and then when we submitted that to the core, the status became waiting for core to agree. As the core will come in and they're going to review the details of this request. They're going to check out what kind of responses you provided in your form. That's going to help them build out a quote and understand what is going to be required to complete your request. They can add the charges to that request, which builds out a quote for you. And when the core agrees to the request, it will go back to the researcher for re-agreement if additional charges have been added. If the core hasn't needed to add any additional charges since the researcher submitted that, it won't have to go back to the researcher for re-agreement. That's only if additional charges have been added to it. Once the researcher gets that back, they can review the quote and then they can agree. And then if the researcher has agreed to it, it will go back to the core unless the total amount of your request, projected cost, is above an auto approval amount that your PI can set for you. So on that lab settings page where we had the researchers where we were assigning shortcodes, there's a second page where the PI and lab manager can set an auto approval amount for your whole lab. So if that is above, if the request amount is above that auto approval amount that they have set for your lab, it will go, after you agree to the charges, it will go to a status of waiting for PI to agree, or waiting for PI approval, excuse me. At that point, your PI and or lab manager, either one of them can take care of this in the system for you, also need to agree to it. Basically, it's saying this is over an auto approval amount that I automatically am okay with, and then once they've also agreed, then the status becomes waiting for core to begin. You'll notice there's these little blue question marks. They're kind of help cheat sheets throughout the system, and you can hover over those and see a definition of the various statuses there. So once it becomes waiting for core to begin, the core can then begin on the work. All of the financials have been approved, and everyone's agreed to the terms of the request. Once they click begin, the status will update to processing. Once the core comes back and clicks complete, then it will be completed, status of completed. This column here, the cost column, is got two different values in it. The top one is the projected cost, and the bottom one is the actual cost. These two items can diverge. Right now, both of these are 0 because we have, the core has not actually added any charges here. The core hasn't built out the request yet. So when you initially send it off to the core, it will likely be 0 across the board unless they have asked you to identify specific charges in the form. This particular core did not. And then the core will build out that quote and send it back to you, and the actual cost will remain 0 because they haven't added any actual charges to the request, but the projected cost is, say, $2,000. As the core begins to work on process on that request, you'll see the actual cost, this lower number here, start to creep up towards the projected cost. There are times when these two numbers may diverge. One example is maybe you had initially projected 3 elements in some experiments you were going to do, and the core completed those, but maybe your results turned out more favorable than you anticipated, and so you then wanted some more downstream requests or downstream services added to your request. At that point, the actual cost may end up higher than the original projected cost because when you originally contacted the core and they agreed to your request, the terms were only for those initial 3 items, and you later on decided you wanted to add additional things to that. Likewise, the reverse can happen, and you may have a projected cost of $2,000, but you get to a certain point in some of those services and your samples fail, or they're not viable for further downstream processing. So maybe the core couldn't complete the 3rd item, and so your projected cost was actually higher than your end actual cost. Does that make sense? Great. Okay, then I wanted to just quickly review some of the icons on the right here. The first one is the $sign icon. This is how we're setting up payment information. So we initially set the payment information when we made our request, but let's say you talked to your lab manager and they said, gosh, I really need you to not use that fund number anymore. I didn't have a chance to unassign it from you in iLab, so I'm sorry, it's still there. You can come back in here by clicking on this $ icon at any time, and then you can just simply select a different payment number here. So you can do that at any time. You just want to make sure you click Save, and that's going to update that payment information for you. The next icon here is a little communication bubble. This allows us to sort of communicate with other folks in the system. One thing to keep in mind, this is not sending out from your personal email address. This is sending out a system-wide notification, so the return address would be a noreply@ilabsolutions.com. But it is a quick way to get a message out on that particular request. When we click this bubble, several different folks who are associated with the request will come up automatically. Financial managers, so basically PIs and lab managers. Any department managers, not all labs are associated with a department. That's something that we're looking at fleshing out in the future, but it's sort of in testing phase now. The PI, so Nicole is the PI, and the researcher. Nicole actually happens to be the researcher here too. We also have a field where you can type in an actual email address if there's some third party that you want to include that's not automatically part of the profile on this particular request. And then you can simply type a message here. You can check box this if you'd like a copy sent to your own email, and then simply click Send Message. Again, just a reminder, these won't come from your personal email address, so if somebody replies to them, you're not going to be getting that response. It will go to a no reply. We also have several filters on the left. As you can see, we only have one single request in the system right now for this particular user. But as time goes on, you may have lots of requests, and you may like to be able to come in and really narrow down your search results. And you can do that using the filters here on the left. You may be part of multiple labs and you only want to see results for one particular lab. So you can filter by the lab. Once you set your parameters here for what you would like to filter by, you can click Apply Filters, and then it will come back with just the search results from those parameters. Again, not a very exciting feature to show with only one request here, but you can imagine if you had dozens of requests in the system, this would be very handy if you're trying to quickly find something. Any questions on this particular page? One other thing I'd like to point out is this is sort of high-level details, but I can get back into the nitty-gritty of that request at any time. Again, if I just log back into iLab, I can go to List All Cores and click on the core that I wanted to see, and go on to the View My Request tab. At any time, if I want to come back and review this, I can simply click this blue triangle to toggle open the details of the request. The overview section here has mostly profile information around the user that's made the request. The payment information is there. Then there's the form and request details. Again, here's my form again. I can toggle this open and look at it and refer back to it at any time. And as charges get added, I will also be able to see those displayed here in line items. Any questions on the View My Requests tab? Okay, let's go back to the Request Service tab. When we placed that request, we went automatically to the View My Requests tab, and I didn't get a chance to see if anyone had questions about the Request Services tab. Okay, just a few more tabs to review. The one on the other side of View My Request is Contact Us, and this is basically just an emailing vehicle. So this is a way to get a quick message to the core. The core has an email address set up for receiving any messages that come in through this tab, and you can just type something to the core here and submit. And the Reservations tab, this is something that is tied to Schedule Equipment. So if you're landing on a core that doesn't have a Schedule Equipment tab, they are not going to have a Reservations tab. The Reservation tabs allows you to see things at a bird's eye view across the core. This particular core has just one piece of equipment, but you can imagine if the core had 5 or 6 pieces of equipment, we would have 5 or 6 columns here, and you could see the open versus occupied times across the different core, across the different instruments from a bird's eye view. Any questions on any of the tabs from the user side of things? So again, users going in through List All Cores to identify the core they'd like to place their request at. Then they're selecting either the service request services if they're wanting to submit some kind of a project request, or the schedule equipment tab if they're wanting to make reservations on a calendar.
What if you know that your core does have a calendar, but it doesn't pop up here? It's not saying you need to like request additional training.
Okay, I'm sorry, so you go to the core and they have the calendar there, but
no,
you can't
there's
access
no calendar, but there should be.
Okay, well, then I would use the contact us and just say, you know, I know you have this piece of equipment and I don't see it represented in iLab. How are you handling that? Because they should, you know, most cores are going to want to have everything they possibly can within iLab. There may be some instances where they may be doing some kind of slower transition to iLab where they do most of their equipment and maybe they have a few pieces of equipment that haven't quite made it across yet. That hasn't been the case with any of our cores so far. But technically,
The flow.
Yeah, flow core. I don't see any calendar.
Are you a trained user?
you should still be able to see
I've
the
done
name of the
photos.
equipment whether you're
That
trained
you
or
should
not.
See it,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
It's just that when you click on it, if you're not on the trained list, then you'll get that message we saw earlier.
Yeah, she doesn't even have the
I can
Like-
go.
like a
schedule
tab or-
equipment tab on hers, so.
Yeah.
Oh, she doesn't have a view equipment tab. That's because of the access request. So when the access request is processed, they can decide to give access to just the request services or just this schedule equipment.
Okay.
So
okay.
that's something we'll want to go back in through with
With the
Flowcore
core.
and make sure they enable that view for you.
Who's
Yeah.
that on your phone? Wallet. 'Cause I don't have a calendar. I can't even like.
You don't even
I
have a schedule
to
equipment tab.
request. No.
And do you have a request services tab when you go to their core? Okay, so they haven't processed a
Yeah.
access request
Right.
for her. She may be one of the ones that's pending.
Yeah, let's look at that.
When you originally went to the core, did you land on a message that said, you know, this core requires further access request and hit some kind of submit?
I don't know. I did it in a haste when I got.
In a haze?
I thought that I got this email about you won't be able to do sorts if you don't log in. So I was like, oh my god.
Yeah.
And
So when we have, there is a feature called access requests in iLab, and most cores are not going to use it. Some cores may decide to use it just sort of when they first get started in iLab for the first couple weeks as they're getting used to managing the new requests in the system. So this is what happens when somebody who's not on that does not have a access request processed in the system. They can set a specific custom message that will display there, and then they allow you basically to send an access request by clicking this button. You can also add an optional note.
okay. I don't remember doing this when I logged in.
So you can add something here if you want and then send the access request, or you can just send the access request.
Let me take a look.
And where would you like?
So when you click on flow, let me just take a quick peek at what you're saying.
So if I go to list all cores
Mhm.
and I click on load.
Okay, so they have processed your request, but they haven't given you access to either of the two tabs for which you need to actually submit a request.
Okay.
So,
So Dave has to really go in and
yeah.
do
But
that,
did you
right?
say, were you able to get him tomorrow?
Yeah,
Maybe we
I've
can
sent
review
him a
that too.
message. Yeah, I've sent a message to him. I haven't heard back. from
Okay.
him yet.
Yeah, so we'll be touching base with the Flowcore on that specifically.
Okay.
But yeah, that's the problem right now is they turned the feature on, but they didn't necessarily process your request the right way.
Okay.
This
So
is
they haven't
So
turned
this
on that
is
access to you.
essentially how it should look. It's not.
This is how it should look for you right now because
Okay.
of the way they processed it. But once we get that straightened out with them, you will have those there. I'm gonna put a little star by your name on here
no.
so that once I
Okay,
talk to
then I'm
them, I
gonna
can
do this.
send you
Are
a
you
message
Ashley
to let you know.
Harris?
Mhm.
I see her with 2 login addresses too.
Oh, okay. Let's look at that afterwards then.
Okay.
Um,
I'm wondering whether that is causing. No, it couldn't, right? Couldn't cause this problem. She has a med.umich.edu and a umich.edu.
Okay, let me look quickly here.
Yeah, 'cause I think it. Yeah.
Did you try log? Yeah.
Well, 'cause I
email.
initially got the email under my plain image, which I never use / don't even really know if it really exists. I guess I don't know how to access.
That's the one that I.
And then my med image is the only one that I actually do access / know how to access. So I had to like add my
Okay. Is it Harris?
Yes.
Oh yeah. Okay, so
Is it on our orientation?
umish.edu is the one you use?
No, med. I don't actually know how to access just plain UMich.
Okay, but you know how to you know what your umish credentials are.
Yes.
Okay, so those ones are the ones that are associated with the authentication.
Okay.
So give me a minute to see if I can do some. Have you placed any other requests in the system, or are you just barely getting started?
I've made requests outside the system
happened?
since
Okay.
I've requested
I know
iLab,
that's
and
the-
emails
that's
have
the
gone
biggest-
out regarding my request that I don't get.
Every time I
'Cause
click
they're
on it, it
going
shows
to the
something
weird-
else.
I don't know where they're going, but because I just used the flow core last week, and then emails were sent and all this stuff, but I don't see them here, and
Okay, this
don't
is
get emails.
interesting. So
Yeah,
you're
it's
part of the
going to
Lawler
UMich.
lab,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and are you you're the manager
Yes.
of the lab? Okay, just wanted to double check that, and let me just double check what's on the other account.
Well, if you want, just tell me where to go, what do you want to do?
Oh, no, no. Siri's pulling it out for them to see. Let me see that.
Okay. Let's see, and your, sorry, I can't see both screens at once. Is your umish.edu account Harris AP also? Same username?
I guess. I've never logged into that.
Okay.
I don't know how to work
Yeah.
that.
It should be coming to your email ID, to your one mailbox. Are you not seeing it?
I'm not getting any emails from iLab to that, but they're going to my
Answer
PI.
this question.
What's going on?
Yeah, she has med.umish and the umish ID, and she's not seeing any of the umish emails coming into this. Yeah, she has a setup forwarding.
I'm committed. Yeah.
So,
Actually,
yeah, that's what, yeah. Good to have
Have you
these
ever done
MSIs.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Make this thing.
We try.
All right, go ahead and open up the browser menu. Or actually just hit.
Have you got this? This is the first
There you
one.
go. Right. Yes, okay. We're gonna go to community.
So sequencing code is not on it.
Not yet,
Not
maybe
yet.
last week. Might.
Apparently I don't know. Okay, go to my profile. It's hard to say. Yeah, so basically anything that goes to your umish should be getting forwarded to your med.
Okay.
So it shouldn't matter what address it goes, send you anything at.
That's good. So,
So-
I haven't been probably ignoring
No, so you
email
don't,
those.
no. So once
Okay.
you go to a website and register at, at umish, it'll go to both your addresses.
Okay.
So, but you want it to go to the med.umish.edu?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so now go back to, if you can go back to the list all cores and refresh that page for the flow core. Let's see how that works for you. Okay, can you try logging out and then logging back in? I switched around the authentication context, so I can just there, and then you can just click back here again and similarly number you.
Oh, you wanna see what happened to us?
Okay.
Go back.
Okay. So that's because I just stripped you of those.
Almost. So then it will-
chart again, frankly, but I think it's just that I stripped that off of your account. So yeah, go ahead and click that.
Never drive through, never follow me.
And then I can come in and process it. Okay, I don't think that you should hit that anyway since it's already something else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I may have just
Yeah, well,
crossed
because
over from
fund
the
manager,
side.
he said fund manager. Yeah.
So try doing that again, and then we can look at that a little bit more.
Yeah, she's still showing up with two, right?
She's still showing up as two different accounts, but I basically did what I needed to do to consolidate it on my
So
end,
you-
and then the engineers will have to just merge the
Ah.
history of the accounts
Okay.
on the in the back end.
Okay.
It looks like we've got another member of the same lab here who's got two.
No, that's her, that's her.
Ashley Harris?
Yeah, that's actually Harris.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see, where were we? Okay, so we kind of covered the initial setup, the registration process, the actual assigning of funds. Again, that's something that only lab managers and PIs are going to be able to do for their labs. Then we've walked through the user side of things, going to list all cores and actually placing reservations or service requests with the cores. The last thing I wanted to kind of review with you guys is the view requests. When you click on view requests, you're going to be able to see, again, very similar to the list or view my requests tab on a specific core, but this is going to show you across all the different cores. So I can click this to show the filters, and again, I can see lots of different things across the cores. So actually, as the lab manager of that lab, when you come onto this page, you're going to see the requests for all of your lab members, not just your own. But when you go to a specific, when you go to a View My Requests page, you'll see your requests. But yeah, you'll be able to see all of those folks. So you can see awaiting approval, how many of those are waiting for PI approval, and you can help push those through by clicking approve or deny here. On the require payment information, and again, sorry, I'm kind of skipping over, but this is the same kind of columns as, let me see if I can make this bigger. These are the same columns as we were seeing on View My Requests. So same icons, same projected cost versus actual cost, status, the service ID. So those are going to be the same values as you see on the View My Requests. The nice thing is this is just going to consolidate those across all the different cores so that as lab manager you have a very convenient place to look across all of those. Require payment information would basically be just that. If they don't have payment information updated on their particular request, you're going to see that on this tab. We don't have any here for Nicole. Processing and recently completed, if I click on this one, I'm going to see just that, all of those that are in the status of processing or recently completed. Let's see, sorry, I don't think I clicked it. There we go. So I have 41 different ones. I have 5 pages worth. Again, this might be a time where you want to show those filters and say, I just want to see it for the La Puma lab. So I'm going to come down here and apply my filters. I now, instead of having 5 pages of return results, I just have 8 lines on a single page. I can come in here and quickly, as lab manager, say, I want to make sure that my folks are using the right payment information. So I'm going to come in here and just quickly review, yep, this is what I wanted used for that one. If I can't remember what that project was and I need more details, I can click this open and see all of those request details just like I did on View My Requests. This one has a lot of charge line items on it. So I can come down here and you can see the actual line item of charges. There's several different forms that have been added to this, so you can click that open and see all of the different forms that have been added to any individual request. So then we have the All Requests tab, which basically encompasses the other 3, if you want to see all things at the same time. Any question on the view requests?
So sorry to
No, please.
Bring up because I was just the full core last week, and even though I didn't book through this, because I can't such on how to work it, we got this email with all these details. I didn't get it. My boss got it. She forwarded it to me. But I didn't see it in here, and now I can't log in anymore. But is that because the full core doesn't give me access, or?
No, it would be dependent on the way your lab is set up. So let's take a look directly at your lab when we're all wrapped up here, and then we can make sure that you're getting those, that you were set up as the core contact for that lab. In fact, let's do that now.
Yeah, let's look at it.
So Nicole's also an institution admin, so I'm going to be able to sneak into your labs, even though Nicole's not a PI of those, to just take a look at that if that's okay with you, so we can kind of triage it. For those of you in this room, you won't have access to a University of Michigan link on your left. That's just for institution administrators. And let's see, it was the Lawler lab. Elizabeth or Martin?
Yeah, no.
Elizabeth, yeah.
Oh yeah, there was your name, I saw it. Okay, so I have you, this $ icon indicates that you should be getting the information. When this is set, this checkbox here, core financial contact, you should be getting notifications anytime someone attempts to log into the lab and request access, like we just had all of these help desk folks do. You should also be getting a notification anytime the core is sending out notifications for, this needs payment information, or you notice when we click the communication bubble, the financial contacts displayed. So you would be displaying for all of those, anybody on yours, they decide to send out some kind of random communication. So that all checks out.
Check my spam.
And Dr. Lawler is also set up as a core financial contact.
Yeah, she got it, but not me.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see anything fishy going on there.
Unless it said med.umish. I was going to
Yeah,
Dr.
but she
Lawler's
had the
email.
med, so she has the med.umish.edu, but that's where she says she likes to get her email.
Yeah.
And previously she didn't have the email forwarding set up, so it's quite possible
No,
that,
I did the forwarding set up.
what's that?
The forwarding was set up.
Oh, it was already set up?
Yeah.
Okay, then I'm not sure what's going on with this one then. If you have an example of that message you got from Dr. Lawler that you'd like to forward to me,
Yeah.
I can certainly investigate, have the engineers look at the issue date and time of what that was and see if for some reason it might be just going to a spam folder you have.
Yeah, I just looked at my spam. I don't see it.
It would have been from a no reply at ilabsolutions.com with a hyphen between no and reply. Okay, well, do you have maybe 5 minutes to stay after and we can kind of look into some of those things? There was one last thing I wanted to kind of review with the group before we wrapped up, and that is back sort of on these lab settings pages, the ability to request access to additional shortcodes. And let's see, what happened to my cheat sheet list? So with the financial integration that we have with University of Michigan, we're importing sponsored funds for the lab, and you can see those listed here. This is actually a great example, if you don't mind Ashley us continuing to use this. The red ones are ones that are set to expire within 30 days. Kind of a nice way to visually just have those stand out to you as you're in the lab. So we have we have all of these set up here, but if we want access to additional funds that aren't automatically set up for our lab in the system, then we need to use this request access to additional shortcodes. And actually, I don't want to use your lab to do this because we don't want to import a bunch of funds that aren't necessarily right. So I'm going to go back to the iLab test lab. And again, we're doing this on the membership requests and shortcodes tab within the lab settings. We're clicking request access to additional shortcodes, and I can actually key in a shortcode here and request access to it. For right now, the only type of shortcodes that will work here are non-sponsored funds. So that would be departmental funds. The sponsored funds is being added to this functionality, but we're a few weeks out from that actually coming to fruition. So I'm happy to send out a notification to all of you when that is actually set. We're hoping it will be ready around November 4th. So I'm going to use a sample one here that Cassie has provided me. I'm going to request access to this one. Oop, I already did that one. I did that one earlier today. You can see it down here. Let's try 3. Okay, so I went ahead and added that here, and you can see I've sent some other ones that I did in previous training sessions today. But here's the shortcode. It will show you the requested date, the status is pending, and who that was resolved by. So the resolved by column, if it's still pending, this means this is the fund owner. So this is the person who should be resolving that. If you have something that gets stuck in this workflow, you can reach out to one of the institution admins. They can also help process that. And that would be Cassie, Anita, Tony, Jen, and Nicole. They can all help process that. So once I've done that, I just have to kind of wait until it gets approved. Once it's approved, it will display with an additional column here. I am going to now show you how those fund owners are able to process those requests. If I am a fund owner, and Nicole happens to be one, I can click on View Funds, and I will not have a View Funds link in my left menu if I am not a fund owner. So only fund owners can access this screen. You can see that the request I made just now is listed here at the top. I can add additional notes and then click Accept. Once I process that, it will now populate in the labs list. So now if we go back to my labs and I go to my iLab test lab, here's the new one that I just added. So once it was approved, it was added here. You'll notice it's completely blank. I will need to go in and assign funds to various users. And click Save if I want to update those settings. If I come back in here to my request access to additional shortcodes, you can see that one was approved. And the notes that are there. A second thing to point out on this page is the disable and enable shortcodes. If you are a part of a lab that has dozens of shortcodes and it just creates a lot of noise on the screen, you can minimize what's displaying there by clicking this disable enable shortcodes. It will show you all of the ones that are designated for your lab, and you can simply click the box here to disable them, and you can show and hide those, and you can see we now have fewer shortcodes displaying here. One thing to keep in mind, if you're disabling a shortcode, none of those assignments are valid anymore if it's disabled. If it's not on this list to view, those users can't access it. Any questions on the fund request workflow or disabling and enabling funds? Great. Any questions overall with anything that we've covered today? I do have screenshots I'll be sending out that covers both the fund owner portion as well as the lab manager settings portion. So if your name is on this list, let's see, I think someone may have walked in afterwards. Not sure if you got on this. Maybe we can pass that back there. I will send out to anybody whose email address is on there, the documents with the screenshots and details on what we covered today, so you can refer back to that.
Siri, if there is a request made on one of the shortcodes that are available at one point and then gets turned off, makes it disabled, what happens to the scheduled equipment if that's already been scheduled using a shortcode that was enabled?
Yes, great question. So, by that rationale, if I'm on this view requests page,
Right.
and I've just done that, and I made a request that initially had a shortcode, but then my lab manager comes in
Yeah.
and disables it.
Right.
Then, when I come in here to the require payment info,
Mhm.
it's going to show up here because that was once didn't need payment information.
Right.
Suddenly it now needs payment information because that's been disabled.
Right.
So basically, it would have a $sign icon with a little,
Ah.
the yellow pencil, basically
Okay.
saying, hey,
Please
you need to
provide.
edit this.
Okay.
So yeah, when that happens and it no longer has its active fund,
Mhm.
then it's going to populate here as a required payment information.
Okay. But that happens quite a bit.
Yeah,
That's
from the
right.
core's perspective, I mean, that may go unchecked here.
Mhm.
You know, I don't know how often lab managers would be coming here and looking for those sorts of things, but when the core goes to do the billing,
Yes.
they're going to see that same thing, that little yellow pencil. So they'll need to resolve that, whether they reach out and say, hey, please go in and identify this using the communication bubble.
Okay.
But there are lots of ways in the system to push that around and try and get that resolved so that they can either resolve it and include it in their billing event, or decide they don't have time to resolve it and they really need to process that and exclude it until the next cycle.
Okay. But it will not prevent them from using the equipment or anything, right? Once you set the-
No, it won't prevent them from using the equipment. Basically, we have checkpoints where we require, based on what the core decides, I want to require payment information at the time my request or reservation is made. And if they're doing that and there was a valid one at that time,
then
that's when
I
they're
just
doing
wanted-
the
yeah.
check. If it
Okay.
becomes invalid or inactive sometime between now and then,
Mhm.
there's not much they can really do about that. They don't go back and, delete the reservation or anything like that.
Yeah.
But they do notify
Right.
the core manager, the PI, anybody who's coming in and checking up on their view requests. Hey, this one has a problem on it since you
Because I
initially
did
submitted.
notice some that were expired like end of August. By the time we first loaded it, somebody checked it as a usable shortcode, and then I see them still sitting in there. I just wonder what would happen, what our end result would be in that case. I guess I will get that little yellow check probably.
Yeah, if the fund has expired, then they should no longer have a valid payment information or valid payment field. And they would get that yellow pencil
Okay.
basically saying you need to go in and select from your remaining available shortcodes something that is valid.
Okay.
Great. Any other questions for me? Okay, well, thank you guys all for stopping by. If you have any additional questions, go ahead and feel free to respond to the email that I'll send out to everybody. Ashley, if you wanted to stay, we can do a little more troubleshooting on in your lab.
Yeah, I found that email that my boss forwarded to me that I don't have. But, yeah, 'cause once I got this email, I went to log into iLab to find this. So this,
Thanks for coming.